The chilly evening had settled over the city, and the streets glimmered under the yellow glow of street lamps. Maria clutched her worn-out handbag as she hurried down the sidewalk after finishing her late shift at the diner. She was exhausted, her feet aching from hours of standing, but her mind was on her little daughter, Lily, who was waiting for her at home with their elderly neighbor. Maria lived every day balancing work, bills, and motherhood, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that no one could deny. Life had been unkind to her, but she refused to let her daughter suffer the way she did. As she turned the corner, Maria noticed a man staggering near the edge of the park. At first, she thought he was drunk or disoriented, but the way his hand clutched his chest and his body swayed told her something was wrong. Without hesitation, she rushed over, dropping her bag on the ground. The man, sharply dressed in an expensive suit, gasped for air, his face pale and covered in cold sweat. "Sir, can you hear me?" Maria asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising inside her. She had learned basic CPR years ago when she worked briefly at a nursing home, and now, all that training came flooding back. The man collapsed onto the pavement, his breathing shallow. Maria's heart pounded as she checked his pulse. It was weak, faltering. She didn't waste a second. Kneeling beside him, she started compressions, her hands pressing rhythmically on his chest as tears welled in her eyes. "Stay with me, please," she begged. Her voice was trembling, but her will was firm. After a few rounds of compressions and rescue breaths, the man coughed violently, drawing in a ragged breath. Relief washed over Maria as she cradled his head gently. His eyes fluttered open, and he looked at her with a mixture of confusion and gratitude before darkness took him again. An ambulance arrived just in time, and the paramedics quickly took over. One of them turned to Maria and said, "If you hadn't acted when you did, he wouldn't have made it." Maria simply nodded, brushing sweat and tears from her face. She didn't even ask who the man was. Saving him was enough. She picked up her bag, feeling the weight of the world return to her shoulders, and walked back to her tiny apartment as if nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, it was just another night in a life full of battles. What Maria didn't know was that the man she had just saved was Alexander Knight, one of the city's most powerful and wealthy CEOs. He was a man who had everything: wealth, influence, a penthouse that touched the sky, but no one to truly share it with. His days were filled with board meetings and his nights with empty silence. When he woke in the hospital the next morning and learned that a young woman had saved his life, something inside him stirred. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, human, and grateful. He asked his assistant to find her, but all they had was a vague description: a poor young mother who had disappeared into the night. Maria, meanwhile, went back to her routine. She woke Lily for school, packed her a simple lunch, and headed off to another long shift at the diner. Her life was a series of sacrifices: mending old shoes instead of buying new ones, skipping meals so her daughter could eat, and smiling through exhaustion so Lily wouldn't see her mother's struggles. Yet in those small moments, when Lily laughed, when she hugged her tightly, Maria felt richer than any millionaire could ever be. Fate, however, had its own plans. A week later, Alexander walked into the very diner where Maria worked. He had been restless since the night of the heart attack, determined to thank the woman who had saved him. When he saw her bustling between tables, balancing plates, with graceful exhaustion, he stopped in his tracks. That was her. She didn't notice him at first, too focused on her customers, until she turned and found him staring at her with an intensity that made her pause. "You," he said softly, stepping closer. Maria frowned, unsure why this stranger looked at her as if he knew her. Then recognition dawned. He was the man from the park. "You're alive," she said with genuine relief. Alexander gave a small smile. "Thanks to you. You saved my life." Maria shook her head modestly. Anyone would have done the same. But Alexander knew better. Most people would have walked past. Most people wouldn't have had the courage to act the way she did. There was something extraordinary about her, and he couldn't walk away without knowing more. Over the next few days, Alexander returned to the diner, each time sitting at one of Maria's tables. At first, she was wary. Why would a man like him, a man with expensive suits and an air of authority, keep coming back to a place like this? But slowly, he broke through her walls. He asked about her day, about Lily, and about her dreams. Maria found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years. She told him about her struggles, her late husband who had died young, and the endless fight to provide a better life for her daughter. Alexander listened with a sincerity that surprised her. No one ever listened to her story. People only saw a poor single mom trying to survive. But he saw her strength. For Alexander, each conversation with Maria was like a window into a world he had forgotten. Her resilience, her selflessness, her unwavering love for Lily, it humbled him. He realized how empty his own life had been despite all his wealth. Slowly, admiration turned into something deeper, something he hadn't felt in years. But Maria, though drawn to his kindness, was hesitant. She had been hurt before, abandoned, and she couldn't risk letting her heart be broken again, not when Lily's happiness was at stake. One evening, after closing the diner, Alexander offered to walk Maria home. The streets were quiet, the night air cool, and for a moment, it felt as though the world had shrunk to just the two of them. "Why me?" Maria finally asked, her voice trembling. "You could have anyone. Why would you spend your time with someone like me?" Alexander stopped and looked at her with unwavering eyes. "Because when I was at my weakest, when I thought my life was ending, you were there. You didn't see a CEO. You didn't see money. You just saw a man who needed help. And you saved me. That means more than anything I own." Tears filled Maria's eyes, but she quickly turned away, afraid of believing him. Love, she had learned, was fragile. But Alexander was patient. He didn't push her. Instead, he showed her through his actions. He helped Lily with her school projects, fixed things around her tiny apartment, and even brought groceries without making her feel like a charity case. Slowly, Maria began to see that his feelings were real. Months passed, and what started as gratitude blossomed into love. Their worlds, so different, merged in ways neither of them had expected. For Lily, Alexander became more than just a visitor. He became the father she had always longed for. For Maria, he became the partner she never thought she'd find again. And for Alexander, Maria and Lily became the family he had been missing his entire life. It wasn't an easy journey. There were moments of doubt, whispers from people who thought Maria was with him for his money, and her own fears of not belonging in his world. But Alexander always reminded her that love wasn't about wealth or status, it was about the way two souls saved each other. Maria had saved his life on that cold night in the park, but he had saved her heart from the loneliness she had carried for years. Their love story wasn't one of luxury and perfection, but of resilience, sacrifice, and second chances. Maria, the poor single mom who once thought the world had forgotten her, had found a love that healed her scars. And Alexander, the lonely CEO who thought money could buy everything, discovered the one thing he had been missing: true love, born not from riches but from the simple act of kindness on a dark night. And so, the woman who saved a stranger's life found her own life transformed in the most unexpected way. She didn't just save his heartbeat, she became the reason it beat stronger, every single day. Maria didn't expect her life to change after saving a stranger, but fate often works in silence, weaving threads where we least expect them. Each day after that encounter, Alexander became more present in her world. At first, it was simple: small conversations over coffee at the diner, offers to walk her home, kind words that melted the chill of her weary days. But soon, it was more. He began showing up not just as a wealthy man but as someone who wanted to understand her struggles. He asked about the late shifts, about the long hours she endured, about the times when Lily was sick and Maria had to choose between medicine and groceries. These weren't casual questions, they were the kind that came from someone who cared deeply. Still, Maria guarded her heart. She had been disappointed too many times, and the thought of letting someone into her fragile world terrified her. Men had come and gone, most of them leaving when they realized she carried more responsibility than they wanted to bear. But Alexander was different. He didn't run from responsibility, he leaned into it. He offered his help, not with arrogance, but with a gentleness that made Maria's walls tremble. Lily adored him almost instantly. She was shy at first, hiding behind her mother's legs when Alexander visited their modest apartment, but soon her giggles filled the room whenever he sat on the floor and colored with her or helped her build castles out of mismatched toy blocks. To Lily, he wasn't the wealthy man everyone else saw. He was simply Alex, the man who listened to her stories and tucked her in when Maria was too tired to stay awake. Yet despite the growing bond, Maria couldn't shake the gnawing fear that it was all temporary. Alexander lived in a world so far removed from hers. She couldn't picture herself in his lavish lifestyle, couldn't imagine fitting into his circle of powerful friends, and certainly couldn't believe that a man like him would truly choose her over the many polished, wealthy women who would give anything to stand by his side. At night, after Lily was asleep, Maria would stare out the window of their small apartment, battling her own heart. She wanted to believe in this miracle, but life had taught her that miracles never lasted. One evening, Alexander invited Maria and Lily to dinner at a quiet restaurant on the edge of the city. He had reserved the entire rooftop, decorated with soft lights and flowers. Maria felt overwhelmed as she walked in, wearing her simple second-hand dress, holding Lily's hand tightly. She almost turned around, but Alexander's warm smile stopped her. "You look perfect," he said, his eyes locking on hers as though she were the only woman in the world. For the first time in years, Maria allowed herself to believe those words. Dinner was filled with laughter and stories, and for a few hours, Maria forgot her worries. She watched as Lily leaned against Alexander, her tiny hand wrapped around his arm, her eyes sparkling with a joy Maria hadn't seen in so long. Something inside her broke, but in the best way possible. It was the sight of her daughter being loved and cherished, something Maria had prayed for silently every night. But reality returned soon after. As Maria left the rooftop that night, whispers reached her ears. Other patrons, staff members, even strangers who recognized Alexander. "Who is she? Why would he be with someone like her? She's clearly after his money." The words stung like knives. Maria tried to ignore them, but they planted seeds of doubt in her heart. She had worked her whole life to protect Lily from judgment, from cruelty, and now she feared bringing her into Alexander's world would only expose them to more pain. That night, Maria confronted Alexander. "You don't understand what people are saying," she told him, her voice breaking. "They think I'm using you. They think I'm nothing." Alexander reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I can't let Lily grow up hearing that her mother was a burden, or worse, a mistake. I can't let her be crushed by the weight of whispers." Alexander's jaw tightened, his heart breaking at the distance she was creating. "Maria," he said firmly, "I don't care what anyone says. You saved my life, and since then, you've shown me what real love and family mean. I've lived my whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from me, but you never asked for anything. Don't let the world's jealousy take this away from us." But Maria shook her head. Her fear was stronger than her hope. She told him she needed time, and for days she avoided him, pouring herself into work and Lily as if she could outrun the ache in her chest. Alexander respected her space, though it tore him apart. He knew love couldn't be forced, but he also knew he couldn't let her slip away. Fate, once again, stepped in. A few weeks later, Maria came home to find Lily struggling to breathe. Panic seized her as she rushed her daughter to the hospital, where doctors confirmed Lily had a severe asthma attack. Maria sat helpless in the waiting room, clutching her daughter's inhaler and praying through tears. That's when Alexander arrived, breathless and worried. Someone at the diner had told him, and without hesitation, he dropped everything to be there. He held Maria's trembling hands as she cried, his presence a steady anchor in the storm. When the doctors finally said Lily would recover, Maria collapsed into Alexander's arms. In that moment, all her fears melted away. She realized that this man hadn't just been there in moments of joy, he was there in moments of fear, of despair, of the hardest nights. He wasn't running from her world, he was stepping into it, fully and willingly. Days later, as Lily recovered at home, Alexander knelt beside Maria in their small living room. There was no grandeur, no audience, just the three of them in a space filled with warmth. "Maria," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity, "the night you saved me, you gave me more than a heartbeat, you gave me a reason to live differently. I don't care about whispers or doubts. I care about you, and about Lily. I love you, both of you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it." Tears streamed down Maria's face as she finally let the walls around her heart crumble. She had been afraid of love, afraid of being hurt again, but here was a man who had already shown her the truth through his actions. Lily, too young to fully understand, clapped her hands and said, "Mommy, can Alex be my daddy?" That innocent question sealed the moment. Maria nodded through her tears, and Alexander pulled them both into his arms. It wasn't a fairy tale, not in the traditional sense. There were no castles, no crowns, no promises of a life without hardship. But there was love, the kind that grows stronger in the face of trials, the kind that heals wounds and creates a family out of broken pieces. And so, the poor single mom who once believed she was invisible to the world discovered that her kindness, her courage, and her love had rewritten her destiny. The stranger she saved on a lonely night had not only lived, but had become the love of her life. Together, they built a future not defined by wealth or status, but by laughter, loyalty, and the unshakable bond of a family that had found each other against all odds. Life after that confession wasn't suddenly easy for Maria and Alexander. If anything, their love was tested more fiercely as the two worlds they came from began to collide. For Maria, being with Alexander was both a dream and a nightmare. The dream was in the way he treated her, with kindness, respect, and devotion. He didn't just say he loved her, he proved it every day. He was patient with Lily, gentle with her insecurities, and determined to ease the burdens she carried. Yet, the nightmare came in the form of judgmental eyes, whispers, and outright hostility from those who couldn't accept that a man of Alexander's stature could fall in love with a single mother who lived paycheck to paycheck. The first real storm came from Alexander's family. His younger sister, Vanessa, was one of the first to confront him. She arrived unannounced at his penthouse one evening, her heels clicking across the marble floor as she demanded an explanation. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice sharp. "You're seeing some waitress from a diner." Alexander remained calm, though his jaw tightened. "Her name is Maria," he said evenly. "And yes, I love her." Vanessa scoffed. "Love? Alex, you're being played. She saved your life and now she's cashing in on it. Do you know what people are saying? That she's after your money, your company, everything you've worked for." Alexander stood his ground. "Maria doesn't care about my money. If she did, she would have asked for something the night she saved me. She didn't even want me to find her." Vanessa shook her head in disbelief. "You can't be this naive. Think about the company. The shareholders won't like this. Your image matters, Alex. But Alexander only said one thing before walking away. I'd rather lose everything than lose her. Maria, however, didn't hear those words. She only heard the whispers that reached her. Customers at the diner started treating her differently. Some pitied her, some envied her, and others mocked her behind her back. Even her coworkers, though kind, couldn't hide their curiosity. "Are you really with him?" they asked. Maria never knew how to answer. Yes, she was with him, but was it real? Could something so fragile survive the pressure of two completely different worlds? The doubt festered, and it nearly drove her to walk away again. But Alexander was relentless in reminding her that what they had was worth fighting for. He didn't just say he loved her, he showed her. One night, after a particularly hard day when Maria felt crushed by judgment, Alexander took her and Lily out of the city. He drove them to a small lakeside cabin, where the air was fresh and no one cared who they were. They spent the weekend fishing, cooking simple meals, and telling stories by the fire. Maria watched as Lily laughed louder than she had in years, her small arms wrapped around Alexander as he carried her on his shoulders. That weekend, Maria realized something profound. Love wasn't about fitting into someone else's world. It was about building one together. But the challenges weren't over. One of Alexander's business rivals, a man named Gregory Hale, saw Maria as a weakness to exploit. Gregory spread rumors in the business world, questioning Alexander's judgment for being with a nobody. He even went as far as to plant false stories in the press, painting Maria as a gold digger who manipulated Alexander. Headlines blared with cruel words, and reporters began hounding Maria outside the diner, shoving cameras in her face, demanding answers. Maria wanted to run. She wanted to hide Lily from the ugliness. But Alexander stood beside her every step of the way. At a press conference meant to address his company's future, Alexander shocked everyone. Instead of ignoring the rumors, he addressed them head-on. Standing at the podium, he said, "Yes, I am in love with Maria. She is not a gold digger. She is the woman who saved my life, who taught me what it means to love without conditions. If anyone questions my decision, let them. But I will not apologize for choosing love over image. Maria is my future, and anyone who can't accept that has no place in my life, or in my company." The room erupted, half in applause and half in outrage. But Maria, watching from the back, felt tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she truly believed him. He wasn't ashamed of her. He was proud. Still, the journey remained rocky. Maria wrestled with her own insecurities. There were moments when she questioned if she could ever belong in his world of wealth and power. She didn't know the etiquette, the business lingo, or the polished confidence that surrounded him. But Alexander never asked her to change. He loved her exactly as she was. The turning point came one evening when Alexander invited Maria and Lily to a gala, a high-profile event filled with socialites, investors, and politicians. Maria was terrified. She wore a borrowed gown, her hands trembling as she stepped into the grand hall. Eyes turned, whispers started, and Maria felt the weight of every stare. She almost turned to leave, but Alexander took her hand and held it firmly. "Walk with me," he whispered. "Not behind me, with me." Together, they walked into the hall. And though the whispers continued, Alexander never let go of her hand. By the end of the night, Maria realized something important. No matter how loud the world's judgment was, it couldn't drown out the truth of their bond. Months turned into a year, and their love only deepened. Maria moved into Alexander's home, though she kept her job at the diner for a while, not wanting to lose the piece of herself that had carried her this far. Lily flourished in her new life, but more importantly, she blossomed under the love she received from Alexander, who had truly become the father she always wished for. And then, one quiet evening, Alexander surprised Maria again. He brought her back to the very park where they first met, the place where she had saved his life. The air was cool, and the city lights shimmered around them. "Do you remember this spot?" he asked. Maria smiled softly. "How could I forget?" Alexander dropped to one knee, his eyes glistening with emotion. In his hand was not just a ring, but a symbol of everything they had fought for. "Maria, you saved me that night, in more ways than one. You saved my heart, my soul, my life. I can't imagine a future without you and Lily. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred Maria's vision as she covered her mouth with trembling hands. For years, she had believed she wasn't worthy of this kind of love, that life had given her only hardships. But here was a man who saw her worth, who chose her again and again despite the world's opinion. "Yes," she whispered through tears. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lily cheered and clapped her little hands, running into Alexander's arms. The three of them embraced under the streetlights, the same glow that had once witnessed fear now bearing witness to love and new beginnings. And so, Maria's story came full circle. She had once been a poor single mom struggling to survive, unnoticed by the world. But by saving a stranger, she had found not only love but a family, a future, and a life richer than she had ever dreamed. Alexander, the man who had everything but love, found it in the most unexpected place, in the arms of the woman who had nothing but a brave heart and a daughter to protect. They proved that love isn't about wealth or status. It's about sacrifice, loyalty, and the courage to hold on to each other when the world tries to tear you apart. Their story was not perfect, but it was real. And in the end, that was more powerful than any fairy tale. Right finger, if you enjoyed the story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Would you like me to also make a slightly more engaging YouTube outro version? Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more emotional stories, so it feels natural for narration.